View from the Gutters, episode 37. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Revival, Volume 1, and, to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 5541.
I think that you should not see him. We should actually start the episode.
Oh, he's already recording.
Well, I know he's recording, but we need to start the episode.
16 minutes.
So
That's it. That's the intro. Is that 16 minutes?
Is that 16 minutes?
Welcome to View from the
No,
Gutters.
it's only the 5 of them.
Well,
it's
we didn't get the
Lisa,
Majestic
MacGyver, B.A.
and Spock on there,
Baracus, Doc Brown, and Jack Burton.
All right.
All right, we're talking about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the 80s. Anyway, look it up. This is View from the Gutters, episode 37.
Yeah.
And I'm Andrew Chard.
I'm Joe Preddy.
Eric Mannix.
I'm Tobiah Panchin.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
And, we're talking about Revival from Image Comics this week. And Joe, how's it feel to be back from the dead? You don't know this because you didn't listen to the last episode, but we killed you in Cookie
Oh,
Jail.
did you?
Yeah.
You died in
I
Cookie
don't. I,
See, you're one of the revivals.
There's a
Yeah.
Cookie Jail
Revivals.
riot, and you died.
You got shanked with a candy cane.
Yeah.
By the Cookie Monster.
Really?
Yeah,
By the
that's what
Cookie
happened.
Monster.
it was those caners.
Yeah, the candy
Those
caners.
those
Pension
corn
collecting
syrup
caners.
junkies. Fuck those guys.
Those the dudes from Sugar Row.
I feel like caners should be the name of a pensioners gang. Like a bunch of old women with canes walking around.
No, those are the old originals.
The Werther's gang.
The Werther's original.
The Werther's gang.
Those
All
originals.
right, well, this is a new series coming to Fox this fall.
It is. It'll be
Candy gangs.
Well, I'm back, but I'm not.
Yeah, how's it feel?
I don't necessarily want to be associated with this book.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I didn't. We'll wait.
well, I don't know. You go ahead.
Yeah.
Are we going to do
Does
our
everybody-
general, what
Yeah.
did you think
What'd
real
you
quick?
think, and who you recommend it to, Joe?
I pretty much the only group of people I would recommend this to is if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I really like The Walking Dead. What should I read?" And I'd be like, "Well, Revival, but it's not as good." I mean, that's what I would say. Like, I don't want to set you up for, like, I was not a fan, and I think it's half. That I just didn't like it, but I think it's also half because of problems with the book that actually exist. Not like Toby exists, but like really exist.
No, well, I want to follow up on this because I actually agree with you for once.
Whoa.
And the thing is
Cancel
that
the show.
Stop the presses.
We're done.
there's like a genre of comics that's been evolving where it's like this supernatural event happens in this small town and then horrible things happen because there's Girls by the Luna Brothers, there's North 40 by Aaron Diaz, and I'd also kind of throw Lock and Key into
Yeah, I could see that.
although it's a little bit different because they're not like trapped in this small town
I was also
like in all the
reminded
other
of
examples.
Rising Stars.
Yeah, that's getting a little bit further
I could
afield.
see
But I think
the-
that those three, Revival, Girls, and
40.
North 40, all fit into the same little exact setup.
Mm-hmm.
And of those three, this is the least good of all of them.
Yeah, I think North 40, whereas North 40 hit me with a story that I thought was really great and I was really captivated by and I really wanted to know more about. I feel like it's busy. He's he's putting down way too much, way too fast. It's like you're reading 5 issues and there's already like 5 or 6
And I think
subplots on beneath the main plot,
And
which
I
is this
think
revival.
I hate to totally disagree, but I think that I'm not disagreeing with that. That is something that he's doing. And I think the difference between this and North 40 was North 40 was contained. It was like it's those issues and it's done, and he knew that going into it. This is intended to be serialized, like it's intended to be longer. And I do agree that Girls, like the Luna Brothers, are insanely strong creators. Like those guys are really good at what they do, and I think that this is probably not quite as good as the Girls, but in a way I like this better because I feel like The Girls is not the Luna Brothers' best work, so I kind of look at The Girls as like, I like Sword.
I kind of
much
look
better.
at Girls as anyway because I'm not super enthusiastic about this genre.
Right.
If somebody came up to me and was like, I liked both these other things, what else is there like this? I'd be like, oh, well, Revival's the exact same thing. But I agree with Joe. Like, he sets up all of these things, but then it doesn't feel like any of them are really going anywhere. It's just like all this stuff keeps happening, and I don't feel like there's any real forward motion.
It feels like serialized television to me.
Well, but
it feels like Lost at its shittiest.
I feel like
Like,
I'm not
here's this
given
crazy
anything-
thing that happens, and then we're not going to revisit that for a while. And then when we do come back to it, it's like, oh yeah, well, here's this offhanded explanation, and oh my god, this other crazy thing happened.
Right.
I think Lost is an apt comparison. I feel like serialized works, they function on this idea that like there should be a carrot on the end of the rope, and I want that carrot. I want that carrot. So the carrot has to be good. It has to be something I want. In my case, it'd probably be a cheeseburger rather than a carrot. But
Right.
like,
it has to motivate you to continue through the story.
And I have a very specific example of something this story did that really kind of made me kind of not care. In the first issue, she finds her sister. Sister gets scythed.
Yeah.
And she's all like, oh, I'm a revival, and we have to find my murderer. And for the first 5 issues, it's only mentioned twice more, and absolutely nothing is done.
Yeah.
She doesn't track down any leads. She doesn't make any phone calls. And yet there's a specific reference in like issue 4 or 5 where her sister's like, have you done any more work? Or like, we're supposed to be finding my killer. And it's like, well, no, because you're too busy introducing the fact that the CDC guy has this whole thing, and they might be putting the revivals into an internment camp. And then what's going on with the revivals? And then it's just, I don't have any traction. I just feel it's like...
I feel like I don't gain
There
any...
were little hints, but you really had to look for them. Because I actually had the same thing, but then when I went back and looked, you had her... There were like little hints that she was working, you didn't know what it was. She wasn't outright telling you what she's been finding out about her killer.
Right.
It was just like very subtle things. Like you know she's looking for it.
And also, I think that that's a story point. And I don't want to put too much into the writer's mouth here, but what happens at the very end of the story is that you kind of find out that the sister now gets like a really weird high from dying and coming back. Like the fact that she can't be killed, like kind of gets her going in a weird way. And so what I feel like is happening is she's going to realize that her sister doesn't have time to help her look for her murderer. And that gives her, as a character, agency to be like, okay, now I'm going to go look for my murderer. But I'm going to do it in a shitty way because I'm a kid and I'm kind of crazy because I just keep dying and coming back. And I think that something interesting is the fact that these characters die and come back, and it affects them their personality. Because now that they know they can't die, they're starting to change the way they act.
Right.
And I think the more that she dies and realizes she can keep coming back, the kind of crazier that she's going to get. And that's the part that really got to me. It wasn't until book 5 that I was like, all right, I want to see where this goes now.
Yeah, and like I think that is by far the most interesting thing going on. Mm-hmm. And I definitely read like halfway into 6, but then it's like there were a few things in 6 that I was just like, oh, okay, they're kind of setting this up to be something. And this brings me to my biggest problem with it. Mm-hmm. And this is definitely where I set up where it's just that I don't like it. Mm-hmm. This is not a noir story. This is not a noir story but it's billed as a rural noir story.
Yeah,
so
the
when
billing
I picked
is
it
weird.
up, I expected something like Fargo with zombies, which didn't thrill me, but I was much more willing to give a chance.
Right.
And what I got was a horror story. And that's fine. Like, I don't dislike horror, but my expectations were in a completely different realm.
Well, and I think
so
that's-
that kind of made the whole story fall flat for me.
And that's something that happens a lot now is noir gets tacked on to like almost
Which,
everything, and it
absolutely.
doesn't really belong in a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Like the X-Men noir stories to me weren't really noir.
No, they were more
They're
pulp.
just stylized
Yeah, and I
pulp,
think-
right? And I don't really understand, like, I don't understand why noir has become such a buzzword, but it totally has. And so by putting it on the book, they've gotten a lot of people to pick it up that probably wouldn't have picked it up before. And those people like aren't as versed in noir as you are. So when they read it, they're like, "Oh, that's noir."
And I'm totally
I agree with you on that one. It isn't a noir story. And when I pitched it on the show, I didn't use the words rural or noir because I think that billing is like not appropriate.
I
for the
think
book.
it sets you up to go to a place where this story doesn't take you. So I feel like it was doomed for me almost from the start because of that.
And when I pitched it, I tried to make it seem more like super, because it reminds me more of Lock and Key than it does of like a crime fiction story.
There's actually something about that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah,
but finish your thought.
No, I was just saying like it feels more supernatural.
The kid with the glasses and he's carrying the two toys.
Yep.
Cooper.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Immediately made me think of a very similar looking character in Lock and Key.
Right.
But different acting. But that association just immediately, like, completely threw me out of the comic. Like, I hit that page and I was like, it's the exact same fucking kid. What the fuck? And, like, I could never get back into the story.
Right. I mean, he is just a kid playing with toys, and it's, like, unfortunate that he happens to have glasses and look fairly similar to Cooper.
Yeah.
And it's like, oops, design error, because I think if you'd made that kid look any different, it would have been a lot easier to accept that. Because that kid plays no role in the story except that he is, like, oh, he's the kid of the main character, so she has something to like work for.
Right.
It gives her more motivation.
And that's another problem I had. Like I kept expecting the kid to do something,
right?
And he was just kind of there.
Is a very active part of Lock and Key in some places. Like he sees things that because the kids can see magic and the adults can't in Lock and Key, and like that makes a huge delineation.
Yeah, like he's very aware.
He's aware of what's going on.
All the adults think that he's just a retard, and so nobody listens to him or really pays attention to him.
They kind of are like really dismissive of him because his mom is also a single mom, and like her mom was a horrible woman.
Yeah,
so
in
Lock and Key,
like that was a really strong character. It was a really interesting thing, and it unfortunately set up this really shitty parallel with it for me in this story that made me like it less. And I recognize the fact that that's unfair. But it still happened. Right,
and I think that's something you have to do as a creator and a character designer is, like, try to distance yourself from stuff that you are similar to. Like, if you're trying to tell a similar story to Lock and Key, that's fine. Like, because that is a genre and you're not copying a piece of fiction. But if you're going to make similar-looking characters, you're going to draw a really heavy parallel. Yeah. So I think that that's an unfortunate character design error.
Yeah.
In my mind.
The scene with Cooper talking to the ghost, did that happen in the first 5, or was that a little later on? Because I did read it past.
I think it happens in 6.
Yeah, I read a little bit further too. That's later.
I think I don't feel that this is a horrible book by any stretch, and I definitely feel like if you're into supernatural comics and you like this idea, because I think there are some interesting things there. I think that what it feels like to me when I read this is that he got all caught up in this idea, and so he's just kind of vomiting it all up at once. There is nothing there to keep me interested because all I see are the beginnings, and because those beginnings are kind of like meh to me, I don't want to keep going. I had the same...
Yeah, like I honestly think that this is a problem of the author not being the strongest storyteller. Because like a really good character or a storyteller would kind of introduce the very basic facts of the setting, the main character, the basic setup, and they would have a story arc that, builds, climaxes, and completes. And in the process of that, they would kind of introduce a couple of concepts to you, and then they would move on to the next story arc and they would introduce more concepts and they would build out slowly from there. Yeah. Whereas this, it feels like he's just throwing everything out at once.
Well, that's why I say it feels like TV drama to me, because this is how I see a lot of television shows working, is like a lot of stuff just starts to happen because they want to keep you very interested. They want to keep you coming back for more. But I think a master class on what Toby's talking about is Fear Agent Volume 1. The very first issue is a standalone story of I can never remember his name.
Is it Cliff?
No,
It's something like that, though.
The main
Yeah,
character.
whatever his name is.
His name I've totally
Go
forgotten.
back and listen to our podcast.
Sorry, Remender.
Heath Houston.
Heath Houston, thank you.
That's it.
So Heath has this like mission on a planet where they're all the apes and he's fighting, and he like barely escapes by the skin of his teeth, and you find out he's kind of like a Conan the Barbarian sort of, roguish Han Solo-y sort of character, and you find that out in the first issue, and then the second issue begins that little arc on the space station.
Right.
And so you are introduced to the world and what he does. He's like an exterminator or whatever. And then you get a story arc that like builds his character and introduces more things into the world. It introduces a second human character. It introduces like more about his ship and stuff. And so I really do think that Fear Agent Volume 1 is kind of a masterclass in what we talk about.
Yeah.
And it's something that I talk about a lot with world building, which is where if you just drop little nuggets of information along the path, like little breadcrumbs, like I'm going to go for it. Like I'm going to keep reading because I'm like, oh my God, I'm interested in the world.
And this is,
but the problem with this is I already know this world because it's our world and it's not as interesting to like learn about. So you can't really tell it in the same way unless you're going to tell it through characters in the town.
I feel like,
You know what I mean?
The
Like
thing
Twin
is-
Peaks style, where like the characters in the town. Well, Twin Peaks might be a bad example of this, but like characters in the town are interesting, and I want to learn about them.
Right.
Eureka is a great example.
Yeah,
of
no,
that.
I agree.
And so
Well, I think that Fear Agent is a really great example because
Right.
when I got to the end of the fourth issue of Fear Agent, like I was excited. I wanted to know
Right.
more. Like I had all these questions, but I was ready for them to be resolved. And with this, by the time I got to the end of the fifth issue, I was ready to be done. Like
yeah,
there's so much going on, and I'm just spinning my wheels with all of it. And the thing I want to point as a specific example is the Exorcist dude. Like that whole first scene where he shows up in the snowmobile
Yeah.
and the girl is demon possessed, and he's like, "You're just putting on an act because you want attention," and I'm blah blah blah, and like
yeah.
it's just like completely killed the momentum of the story. Like this one thing is happening, and then we jump to this completely different thing
Right.
that doesn't have anything to do with anything, and then we go back to the story.
Well, and then
it's this huge like interruption that doesn't mesh organically with the rest of what's
Right.
going
And
on
because-
at that moment. And that's a great scene, but it should have come much later, closer to when that character started to become relevant.
Right. And I like Tim Seeley a lot, but I will be the first to admit that he's not as strong of a writer as guys like Remender, obviously, or guys like, the Luna Brothers.
I think that's a great example because it's not so much like, I think if you would let that scene kind of sit there for a while and then maybe, down the road after the first year, you've tied up some of this stuff, you bring him back and you're like, oh, okay. Well, now this is kind of interesting. But like he's brought back almost immediately and you're expected to care about him as if you've been through something with him when you haven't. You've seen him basically chide this teenage
Yeah, and
girl.
like he's in the background in a lot of other scenes in the first few issues before he starts to become more important in issues like 4 and 5.
Right.
And I think that he could have ejected that first scene entirely and just had him be this background character.
yeah,
Yeah.
so-
And it's like, I've seen this guy in the background a bunch of times. Why does he keep showing up? Right. And then at issue like 4 or 5, like he suddenly starts to become more important, and then you get the scene kind of explaining who he is a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, pacing is sometimes an issue with some of these early stuff. I think that for me, one of the reasons I really like it is, the idea that these characters are coming back from the dead and what that's going to do to them psychologically, but also the whole like alien monster thing. Like I'm interested in that, but that is totally a secondary to
Yeah.
I want to see what happens to these characters that can't die. Like that's the only thing that really drives me forward, and it's not until issue 5 that really becomes
That really
like
hits,
something
yeah.
I care about. So although the issue, like there are some issues with this book, I will still recommend this book to people that like supernatural horror, that like supernatural horror shows on television, because this does feel like a lot of TV writing, and this did just get picked up and is going to be a show. I don't remember the network. I think it might be FX.
Well, I think,
But it feels like it will work better in a television format than it
That
works
very well might be the
in
case.
comic books, because it does have a lot of the issues of, there's too much going on. The pacing is not for a trade paperback. We say a lot of people
Yeah.
write for the trade,
Yeah.
but this isn't pacing for a trade paperback. It feels a lot different. It feels more serialized, like they intend you to read the whole run as a whole.
As a whole, right.
So I'd recommend it to people that like supernatural horror and stuff like Lock and Key or Walking Dead, like Joe said. People who are fans of Tim Seeley, like if you like hack slash, definitely pick this up. And I want to read till the story, till the series is done, because I think that maybe as a complete arc, it'll read a lot better than a lot of this stuff.
And that could very well be like,
yeah, I'd be more than willing to like come back and check up on it after a while. But I just
when we were talking about empowered in our long run, one of the things that we talked about was it takes the first most of the first trade to start getting going.
Right.
So I may be being unfair by judging this based purely on the first 5 issues.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things I've read where the very beginning is really weak and it only really starts to get good later on.
I feel that way about a lot of stuff.
And I'm willing to acknowledge that this might be one of those things, but based just on the first trade, it's not something that I would be interested in.
Well, I had that problem with Transmat too, where it took me until I think the second or third trade to really be as into it as you guys are.
Right.
I think it's I've said before, it's the third trade. It's whenever the election starts that Transmet really starts going.
It's spoilers for me. It's the assassination. I won't say of who, but go listen to read it and then go listen to our long run episode.
Yeah,
because we talked about this before. But
yeah, the first trade is like 3 issues. It's really short, and then the second trade is kind of isolated stories that are just kind of building the world. I think the difference is that those all work as individual stories. Like you get a beginning, middle, and end with each of those events.
I was hooked from the very first trade of Transmet, even though it's short. There was something, but it could be just because I relate to the character, because I was more interested. I think that you can't, even with a television show, when I think of like good television writing, I think of something like Fringe, which starts very small and local, and then as you get to know the characters. Well, in the 5th season, it's good up until the 4th season. Whatever.
Yeah, I lost interest in things really quickly.
And that's kind of my thing. It's the reason in Final Fantasy you spend the first 10 hours of the game in your hometown, because they're building up your expectation of the world. And when you finally get out there, you're like, okay, cool. Now I actually have a stake in this world. You could and that's kind of what I'm missing.
Well, the thing is that's something that's hard to do in video games too, and it needs to be done right, because you're trying to build the world out. So you start out with a very simple character, and then you add you can do this super move. And then you have a level where you just do that super move.
Yeah.
And then it gets integrated into the game. And then you'll get another superpower. And you'll do a level that's just teaching you how to use that power and how to integrate it with the powers that you have before. And you'll build up from there. And all the Super Metroid games, or I guess all the Metroid games, they work on that principle. You see things ahead of time. There's a door that I can't open. I guess I need this thing to do something with that.
Green door's for.
And it builds the world up.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't just throw all this shit at you and say, here's all this stuff.
Well,
deal with it.
We were talking about good games here, because one of the problems with a lot of games is similar to this story, where it's they give you everything that you can do right at the beginning. They tell you everything that's going to happen essentially, and it feels overwhelming.
Or they do a thing where it's here's how to use your grapple claw.
Here's a
and
tutorial
then you
that you
don't
care
run
about.
into anything with grapple clawing for 10 hours. So by the time you get there, it's okay, fuck, what do I do with this? And that entire time, it's I've got this grapple claw. Can I use it on this thing? No. Can I use it on this thing? No. And that's what I felt that the story was doing. It's here's the grapple claw in issue 1, and grapple claws aren't going to come up until issue 6.
Right. And I think we talked about this with Lost too, is for every question that gets answered, you're just opening more questions. And this book isn't quite as egregious as Lost in that effect, but it does have a little bit of that where you're oh, I wonder what that is. Also aliens, and you're wait, what?
Now, is that thing actually an alien? I thought it was a ghost.
It's we don't know. That's as far as I've read, I don't.
I read all 14, so they start to explain it a little better.
You've been pretty quiet so far.
You guys had strong opinions. I wanted to make sure you got them.
And obviously you've read further ahead, so maybe you can answer some of these questions for us.
I'll say I agree that format-wise, I don't think it's terribly successful as a trade paperback, because originally I just read the first 5 in one sitting. Personally, I really enjoyed it, but I got to the end of 5 and I was like, there's no way I'm going to stop here, because to me, I agree again that like there's a lot of trades, even if you're doing an ongoing series where I guess I'm used to guys like Bendis or someone like that you can introduce subplots, but there's still a 5 or 6 part arc that pretty nicely ties up, and even though they're hinting at other things, this one, it was kind of like each individual one definitely set up a lot of questions. But personally, I was intrigued by what was going on, so I got to the end of the 5 and I wanted to just keep reading. So yeah, if I just read the first trade, I think I would have been disappointed, but since I had access to all 14, I just read them all in like the day. And to me, it was cool because each one kind of ends on a little cliffhanger. It is, like a TV show in that respect. And so, but I actually, I liked it. So each one, and now that I'm caught up, I'm annoyed because I have to wait for issue 15 to come out. I'm like, damn. But I don't know. To be fair though, I haven't read North 40 and I haven't read Girls. I'm the type of guy that's mainly coming in from reading a ton of superhero books, so I don't have a lot to compare it to. But yeah, I personally really enjoyed it, and I'm not really a huge fan of horror books overall. That like Hack Slash, I tried to read, I had no interest in it, and
Hack
usually
Slash kind of only works if you're a big fan of slasher.
I love Hack Slash
because that's when they came recommended, and I couldn't go there.
He's like, it's his love letter to all of his favorite horror movies, essentially, and so it like totally works on that level if you love those movies, but. You don't, it's a hard sell. I think.
It's like I love Rachel Rising, and that's probably the only other. Like honestly, like I don't like The Walking Dead. I think The Walking Dead is dumb, and I gave up on it a long time ago. So honestly, I'll disagree. Like on that, like I'd say if people came in and they're to me at the shop and said I'm tired of The Walking Dead, I think it's played out, I would recommend a book like Revival or Rachel Rising to be like, well, if you like that kind of horror thing, but you don't want fucking zombies for the 5,000th time, because that's like every book now ever. Revival's definitely a book that I would recommend. I would warn them that, it does feel more like a serialized thing, so it's not going to wrap up neatly at the end of Volume 1. But if you like it, I do think it does start to pay off. So I'm the type of guy, like I loved Lost the first, 3 seasons, and then I remember at the beginning of the 4th season they started introducing time travel and stuff, and I was out at that point. I was like, I'm done.
Lost is the perfect example of a series that had an incredible amount of potential but never did anything with it. It's because they were really awesome at setting up all of these great plot threads and then never resolving them. Just moving we love setting up plot threads, so we're just going to set up shit. And then we're going to set up more shit. And we're going to set up more shit. And oh yeah, by the way, this other shit that you cared about, that didn't really matter. And here's a very vague explanation of what went on now that it doesn't matter anymore, and it was over 3 seasons ago. Because we're on to this other thing, and oh my god, this mystery.
I can say with Revival that honestly, having read the first 14, which is like 2 trades and then 3 issues past the second trade, the things are related in more of a way than you would think initially. It's not random stuff. He is introducing a lot of pieces at the same time, and again, maybe if he had more restraint, maybe, it wouldn't have all come out all at once, but the pieces do start to fit together in a way that at least I found pretty satisfying. It's just maybe, again, the pacing was maybe a little off. Maybe it was
it's
introducing
weird.
Too much at once.
I think for us, it's really interesting because we're reading this as a trade, because that's kind of how our show works.
Yeah.
But this series actually seems like it would work better as single issues, like if you read it going along, which is something I almost never say about modern comics.
It's a weird thing to think about. But I think...
Sorry.
No, it's...
Well, I was just going to say real quick that one of the things I've noticed with TV series, and particularly Lost, when I tried to watch Lost as individual episodes, I hated it. When I watched it a season at a time, I loved it because I was able to go from episode to episode to episode without taking a break.
Yeah.
And I think most of the time in comic books, like when you've got an entire story, you want to read the whole story at once.
Right.
And so I can totally see if this is a story where the basic unit of the story is the issue rather than the arc.
Right.
It being a thing where it's like, I read this one issue and then I wait a while and I let it sit and I let it digest and the flavors build in my mouth and I really understand it. And then I move on to the next issue. Where binging on it doesn't help you.
Well, and also it's nice to see a series that you can look forward to every week or every month that it comes out, read it, and then not feel too like let down by the fact that they just talked through the entire issue, because
Right.
like things are happening in these issues. Like there's enough content, I think, to keep you happy as you read it issue by issue.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just the pace feels different than a lot of modern comics that I'm used to reading.
My thing is not necessarily with the pacing. It's that if you're going to write that way, and to go back to my analogy, that carrot needs to really be apparent. It needs to be like, I feel like the most interesting thing to me is the thing that gets talked about the least, which is what's going on with the revivals. If you took this story and shifted the main character from Dana to her sister, the story immediately becomes much more interesting to me, because then I'm like, all right, she's this inept kid. Her sister's a cop and her dad's a cop, but can she go to them? She's dealing with all this shit and she doesn't know how to find her killer. All she knows is that, like, when she fucking dies, because like the whole when she dies and she gets a charge out of that, that's like, if she's the main character and you introduce that in issue 2, it's like, oh shit. Yeah. Well, now I have a reason to keep reading this, because what's gonna fucking happen to her? Rather than like, it's the fact that I never feel. I think with serialization, you need purchase. You need to be able to dig your hands in and hold on, because you need to want the big part of it is you're waiting for that cookie, right? You're gonna hit the bar every month and it's gonna come out. You're gonna read it and it's gonna give you that fix. But if you don't care about the fix, then immediately the serialization, the drama that can, because serialization is an amazing tool for building drama and like getting you to connect in a really deep way, but it's got to be used in that way. And I think for me, it's that everything happens so quickly that I don't really connect. Like, I mean, I'm a single, like I have a girlfriend, right? But I'm a single parent, right? I know what that's like. And I feel like I could really connect with that. But I don't really see a lot of Dana, so I don't really know who she is as a character. I kind of get glimpses of it. She's got kind of a strained relationship with her father, but, and then, like, I only see glimpses of her sister, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. I know that she's, like, looking for something, but then there's this other thing with the reporter, and I can't really get a grasp on her either, because everything is so rapid fire that I'm not...
And sometimes you can't really tell which character, or, like... Sometimes you can't really tell who they are. You're like, I think I've seen this guy before. Which one was he? Oh, he was that guy.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and that's what I was talking about earlier with like building the town, making each townsperson into an interesting character. Like they feel very cardboard sometimes.
Yeah,
and that's what allows me to forget who they are.
And I also had a more minor objection to the comic. And I almost hesitate to bring it up because the art isn't bad. It's actually pretty good art. It just feels very generic.
Yeah.
Like none of the characters really seem to stand out visually to me. Like it just felt very baseline, very ordinary.
The scenery to me though, and the way that the shots setting up the town and like the back roads in the woods, that stuff really appealed to me though.
I think it's interesting to see Mike Norton draw like this because for most of his career, as far as I know, he's done superhero books. So, like, going from big climactic superheroes punching and buildings crumbling and, like, all kinds of that to a much more, like, restrained human level of art, like, it feels so different from Mike Norton's other work.
right.
That I agree with Toby. It feels like this. If you hadn't told me this was Mike Norton, I might not have known. Like I might have been like, oh, this just looks like whoever's drawing indie book X about people in a small town at the time because it shares a lot of tonality, and I don't know if that is so much in the way he draws or in the coloring, because the coloring image is not going to be as high budget as a lot of stuff. I say this a lot, but. The colorist can really set a lot of the mood.
Yeah.
And some of these scenes in here, I think, could have been vastly improved by a more supernatural thinking. Yeah, for the palette, right? Because it's like, it's very stark, like Fargo at times. But some of the interior shots are just the lighting isn't as interesting as I think it could have been, and especially the scene where she's tied up on the tow truck could have been a lot more impactful.
Yeah.
The reporter,
No, I agree
a
with
lot more
that.
impactful if like the lighting had been more spooky, or because everything is so well lit all the time.
Yeah.
That even when the ghost monster things are running through the woods, like I can see it so clearly as a reader. That it doesn't have the same effect as if you were watching a horror movie and they're like not showing you a lot of the creature. You know what I mean?
This is I think that's the problem with the whole book for me is impact.
Yeah.
There needs to be more impact. If you had that first run and it ends with Dana finding out that her sister is a revival, that's like, oh shit, it's on now, right? And you've set up the town because maybe you've had Dana doing this whole murder investigation that is just getting underway. Maybe she's been doing that for 5 issues. And you can have the little panels in there where you have the CDC guy talking to his people and stuff like that. You can throw that in there as long as there's like some kind of art going on. Because there's not, it lacks impact. And the art, it lacks impact. So at the end, I feel like I was thrown up against like a big sheet of glass, and I'm just like what? I could try to cling here, but why? I don't at the end of the day, it's all about why should I care? Yeah. Like, why should I retransmit? Because, there's great character development, there's great world building, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that makes it worth it to struggle through. I had a big problem with Why the Last Man the first time I tried to read it. Sure. I put it down because I felt like, I was like, oh, there's just too much shit going on. But I had somebody come and say, hey, listen, you need to hang in there because there's some really great stuff that happens later on. And there is. Unfortunately, it's all ruined by the ending. But, no, it's for true. It's for true. The ending is awful.
The ending's fine.
The ending is the worst thing I've ever read. It's the worst thing that's ever been written ever.
It's not. That's
worse than an ultimatum.
Worse than anything ever in the existence.
Oh, see.
The ending of Why the Last Man is like if Castro and Hitler had a baby and that baby married AIDS. That's how bad the ending of Why the Last Man is.
That is not even close to true.
No, it's not. I hated the ending.
You haven't read One More Day. You haven't read Ultimatum.
Okay, before we get too
derailed, I wanted to talk about what Joe's
the thing
talking
is,
about.
There is. If you hang in there,
right,
then there's some great stuff that happens later on in Why the Last Man. And because this is just starting, and because there's nobody, it's not like, no, dude, hang in. This shit, the way he does this is really crazy. I'm kind of like, eh.
Well, the thing for me, though, was the impact still happened. Like, I don't need my impact to happen at specific times. Like, if we had waited all the way until issue 5 to find out that Dana's sister was a revival, I don't know that I would have kept reading. Because it was in that issue where she gets stabbed through the chest with a scythe that I was like, holy fuck, this book's crazy. Because it starts off so slow, and I was like, I don't know how this book's gonna go. And that happened, and I was like, oh, fuck, okay, well, I'm gonna keep reading, because, shit's
I actually think
crazy.
that Joe is 100% right that M should be the main character of the series.
Well,
I think that would
too,
radically change everything about it.
Absolutely.
And I would have liked it a lot more.
Interject, she's actually in the second arc of the book a lot more.
Yeah, see, that's a lot of your guys'
complaints. I'm kind of just smiling because, honestly, a lot of the complaints they do.
At the last issue,
she's in the book a lot to the point where I'm like, damn, who's the main character?
Right,
honestly, going forward,
that's
she's
what
in the
I
book
felt
a ton.
At the end of that, after 5 issues was like, oh, now I see that this book is going to be more about.
You can even
story.
see it on the covers. Like
right.
she's the star on a lot of the later covers with that ripped up.
Well, it's even she's on the cover of the trade.
Yeah.
Like,
I wonder if that was actually a case of Tim Seeley starting the series out, and then only after the first few issues realizing, wait, this other character is a lot stronger and more interesting. Let me transition here.
I would think that it's Tim Seeley writes those kind of characters really well, because she's basically very similar to Casey Hack, who is like a young, strong female character who fights monsters.
I love Casey. I think she's awesome. And I love Hack Slash.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
And so I think that he intentionally put her in the story knowing that she was going to be a big part of it. And I think that the buildup of having her sister be like, I'm not really doing much on your case because I got other shit on my plate, is a good setup for her sister to go forward and be like, well, fuck it, I'll handle it myself then. And I think that if that's the way that this story goes, I'm definitely in for the ride, because I felt like the issue. I think it's issue 2 when her sister finds out that she's a revival. That's a really strong impact point for me. And then at the end of issue 5, where she kills that guy, basically. Like
that's true.
That's really strong for me. And it's like, okay, not only is she unkillable, but she is now a killer.
In issue 5, literally that part of issue,
I wish you guys had read more.
Yeah.
And that
He doesn't die. Spoiler.
Yeah.
He's fallen in traction, just jacked up in the hospital.
I figured he wasn't dead.
Yeah, I mean, like, but that's what keeps me going, like, interested in the story is, like, she's willing to cross that line.
Oh, yeah, no, she's
regardless of
totally-
what he dies.
she is a
that
killer,
was the
and yeah,
only
she's
part of the
totally
story that
crazy.
I really had was like, oh wow, this is interesting. Like this is cool.
Also,
but then
yeah.
I like, to be perfectly honest, that exorcism character, I hate him. I think I've seen him in 1,000 other things. I think he's generic, and like he's because I think it's kind of a different facet of what we talk about when we talk about Mark Millar.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's introducing characters that are supposed to evoke certain emotions, but because we have no connection to them, I'm just like, oh, I don't care about this douchebag. Like it's having to earn it, right? You can't fucking just like spit that shit out in 5 issues and have me care. Like you have to work for that shit, and that's cool. Like that's what I love about comic books is that build up.
But I care about certain characters.
I never know M.
Like,
I care about I
right.
want to see more about M, and I'd like to. I really hope that he can avoid having her turn into this kind of like fucking. What was Fairuza Balk from The Craft?
Oh.
Right. I just don't like the whole like,
How
oh,
do
it's a
you
good
remember
girl,
that
but
name?
because like that whole like character trope, she's like driven crazy by her
Right.
own power, and
Yeah.
blah, blah. It's like there's a right way to do that, and there's a wrong way to do that, and
But
I think it's really
I think
easy
it's
to do.
interesting every time you do it, even if you do it wrong. I think that the character of like that character arc of I have a power now, or I have a drive now that I didn't have before. Let me ride that until either I'm awesome or everything is horrible.
Or
like
Fairuza Balk.
Oh yeah, and I love that arc. Like every time I'm on board to see a character evolve like that, because there are a lot of fictional settings in which characters never evolve.
Yeah,
And
I think
that
that's
is
fair.
more
I think
boring
that's fair.
to me than a bad character arc. At least it's a character arc. All
I'll
right,
give you
Cade,
that.
say what you
Okay.
were going to say. I had to get that out.
Yeah, I've been trying really hard to talk on this episode and haven't got a chance yet.
Well, normally I think I'm on. I think normally it is us against Toby, and I like for all the shit I give him. For all the shit I give him,
That should be the name of the show.
like Toby is one
Fuck
of
you,
my,
Joe. It's us against Toby.
For all the shit I give him, he is one of my best friends, and I do appreciate what he has to say, even though I disagree with him a lot of the times.
All the time.
But like, so it's kind of odd when 2 of the most verbose people on this podcast are both like, "No, we didn't like it," because it's like it's.
I love how you're making this statement, interrupting Cade more.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Cade, please tell us what you thought.
I can't hold it back much longer.
So to talk about what you guys were just talking about, I kind of got the feeling that all of the revivers were going to end up going crazy or being killers, and like, and that feeling was starting to get, what's the word? Vindicated.
Real. I mean, yeah, I don't know the word you're looking
My
for,
feelings started to become more realistic, I guess. When you saw the old guy turn his eyeball, but I mean, I guess that was after this one. And you realize that all of them have some crazy shit going on.
Well, the old lady who's in the barn with all the are they cats, right?
Yeah.
She's in the barn.
Yeah.
Well, there's a
and
couple of kittens and then all of her teeth that she's
Oh,
pulling.
that's
Yeah,
what
she
it
keeps
is.
pulling
Yeah.
teeth out.
fucking
Which is
creepy
kind
as
of
shit.
turned me off. I'm not.
Yeah, but that's the first time you start to see the cracks in the revival. Like,
Yeah, so you see her doing that, and then you see M doing her crazy shit, and you realize there's a high out of it. And then in issue 6, which we didn't read for this, but you realize that the old guy,
The dude who's getting the ticket, or a different old guy.
no, a different old guy.
No,
an
the
old guy who
father
was-
of the blonde.
of
his
the
brother
blonde
was just gonna-
reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you realize that father who's been quote unquote comatose,
Oh, right.
and then you see that this whole time he's been faking it, and you're just like, what the fuck?
Well, yeah, you get a glimpse of that in the first 5 issues where she comes home and
her husband is
husband's
dead.
been killed.
No, that's not
And
her
the
husband.
guy.
Oh,
That's
it's
her brother,
Her stepbrother.
Oh.
who she's getting ready to have sex with.
Oh.
Wait, it's her brother?
It's
I
her
thought that was
stepbrother.
someone else's
No,
brother.
her husband is the cameraman.
No, but it's that guy. They're not blood related.
I don't know. All I know
that's
is that
her.
she says
I
comes
don't
home.
know though, because they both do call the old guy Dad.
Yeah.
And it
She
specifically
comes and says
says
Dad.
that he's her stepbrother.
Yeah, I
They
thought he was
call
like
him
married.
her brother, and she when she gets there, she's like, "Oh, so and so thinks I'll be gone for a couple of hours, so do me
Right.
now."
Right, because he's.
But the
or
father's
she's
crying.
cheating.
Well,
She's cheating
I
on her
mean,
husband, right? Is the
With
implication? there, right? Okay.
with her stepbrother,
Yeah.
brother, whatever.
And the father, who they think is comatose, has been sitting there the whole time. They think he can't see anything, and then in issue 6, it's revealed that he's been conscious this whole time and can actually do stuff.
Right.
And so he might be the killer. And
Right,
so
and
you're
that's
you're
implied in
realizing that all the revivers, or at least the major ones that were shown up so far, are becoming killers if they weren't already. And I mean, not necessarily killers. Mannix is over here with this huge, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but
You can spoil it.
Continue.
You can
Continue.
spoil
No,
it all
finish
after
your
we're
thought.
not
Finish your
recording
thought,
anymore.
please.
I realized I was thinking I think it's okay to spoil this since it's the very next issue. So if you liked this, you're going to be reading it anyways. So I did want to talk about my initial reaction to the book. So that thought is over if you wanted to mention something.
All right, so I will spoil the shit and all kinds of shit because I don't care. In issue 12 and 13, you do start to see another side of the revivals, where basically those ghost alien things, they're like disembodied spirits essentially, and if you kind of accept your fate, if you find closure, your spirit will return to you, and then you will die for real basically. This guy combusts in a hospital. It's super awesome because he basically he finds closure to this whole story arc with this ring, and the maid steals this ring, and so it's the ghost is chasing this lady, and why is the ghost after this ring, what the hell? And it's the old guy's spirit, and he finally he's trying to find this ring and kill all these people and go nuts, and then he basically the house maid, she's in the hospital all messed up, but she's alive, and she has this nice little note for the guy saying, "I'm really sorry that I lost your ring," and she makes a ring, this new friendship ring out of all this intertwined metal, and he takes it and he starts crying and basically combusts. Wow. So it's whoa, to me that was a mind fuck, oh, so they're not all crazy monsters. It's basically you can go that route if you get emboldened. Cool. And but to me it's you can also finish whatever business you have left and then move on. Yeah, to me, and again, that does not come across only in one.
Well, it's what
story arc.
I felt about the beginning of this arc is why I picked this trade to recommend, is because I could feel from the beginning of this that there's more going on here than what we're seeing, and it's not cliche.
That's why you get it.
That's what I felt about it. It was this stuff is interesting, and although similar to some stuff we've seen before, I feel is in a different direction than a lot of it.
I can definitely agree with that. My problems with it aren't with the story itself, they're with its presentation.
And that's totally fair. And I think that a lot of that problem is the fault of, the art aside, just the fact that it is packaged as issues 1 through 5 in a trade, and that's how you read it. Is just the fault of how publishing in this industry works.
It's Seeley trying something new, something he's not necessarily as familiar with, and so we'll see what happens down the road. It's I definitely have read things that I disliked a hell of a lot more than this, and I will say that there are some really interesting ideas going on there.
And I just feel thinking about it as we think about how the industry will be in the future. If you had read this as all the issues that are out now because you can read them digitally, it would have had a lot different effect on you than just reading the first 5 because that's the trade that you picked up?
For me it was different because it's like I said, I think I was doomed from the start.
I can feel that.
Yeah. With the whole, expecting one thing and getting another. And that is me. I will say that is totally me. That is not a fault of the story. But
Well, it is a fault of the billing, maybe.
It is
I
a
think
fault of the billing,
a
but
rural
not-
noir story may not be the best description for this.
Yeah, and it's
but
not.
It is
It's
hard
not.
to just. I don't know.
A rural horror story.
I hate genres. We've been
yeah,
over this
I do. But I wanted to hear Cade's initial
thoughts.
thinkings about this.
Okay, so I did actually like this book, but before I say why, I need to start out with why I voted for it, because I feel that it's important sometimes to realize why we do that. This book didn't sound too interesting to me when it was pitched.
Thanks a lot, Kate.
It didn't have anything to do with your pitching skills. Mine are definitely worse. It's just that this doesn't seem like a story I would get into. However, I do feel that it's important that we talk about things that are newer to get our listeners to find something they really like so that they can jump on to it when it is newer.
Yeah, and support the creator as they're putting the book out.
Exactly. And so I thought that this would be a good one to do to, for that exact reason. It's like, it's creators that I haven't really heard of or that I don't have much experience in. It's a newer book. It is by Image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which Image usually puts out good stuff, but people don't give them enough credit for it.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff.
And so that was why I voted for it. I went in expecting it to be absolute shit. I didn't, because I was like, this doesn't really appeal to me. But I had reasons for voting for it, and it won. And so I had no expectations whatsoever. Well, I did have expectations that I wouldn't like it or that it wouldn't be very good. And so I was pleasantly surprised to the point where I did end up liking it. It definitely had some flaws, all of which were mentioned. But, I mean, overall, I felt I had a pretty good experience with it. There were, a lot of times it was very hard to follow. Sometimes you couldn't tell the differences between characters from the art. I really liked all the setup shots of the art. The snowy winterlands, the roads that actually looked like fucking roads if you drove up to Wisconsin in December. It looked very realistic. He did the old cars well. That kind of stuff. So that really pulled me in. The human part of the art was a little awkward. I did have trouble telling some characters apart, or even realizing that one of the characters was somebody we'd previously seen.
Yeah, I had that problem too. I think the character designs could be a little bit stronger.
Like the guy that M was sleeping with, her professor, I mistaken for the Exorcist guy a couple times. They just have different hair color. Other than that, they look identical.
Yeah, I had the second time we met the CDC guy, I did not recognize him as the guy that she had met in the bar.
The thing that that bothered me more than anything else in this comic, as far as the art was concerned, is the dad at the beginning of the story. For the first few issues, he's wearing a brown shirt, and then in one of the later issues, he's wearing a blue shirt.
Damn, those
as a
colorists.
cop, and that seemed desperately wrong to me. I thought that he's the sheriff. He wears the Sheriff Brown shirt,
right?
And then later he's wearing the duty blues or whatever. I don't know why, but that just really bothered me from a character design standpoint. He should always wear the same shirt.
And
I felt that the fact that he didn't was actually a lot more realistic, at least to me, who has experience in this. Is that oftentimes when you're working on a joint task force or whatever, you end up sharing a lot of clothes. And so if he's working at the police station more than he is at the sheriff's office, he's probably going to be borrowing the clothes from the police station he's working at. If he doesn't get a chance to go home and all that stuff.
So was that the difference? Was that he's both a sheriff and a police officer?
Well, I think he was the sheriff, but he was working with the police officers.
Okay.
The sheriff.
That would make sense if that was
the sheriff is
what
usually the
distinguished that. But
Sheriff
it really
is
wasn't
county.
clear to me.
Right.
Yeah, sheriff is for the
Right. I understand that. Like unincorporated county police
Yeah, and
versus
then
like
each
the police
town has
force
their own
within a
police.
particular township or borough.
Right.
Yeah, and I got the feeling from the comic that he was being pulled into here out of necessity, as well as a lot of the city cops were in the country as well, because there were even points where it was saying,
Yeah, they
you know,
talk
this
about how
isn't your
shorthanded they are.
jurisdiction. Why are you even here? You know, you're a policeman. You're not the sheriff, so this isn't your jurisdiction. And so I really got that feeling that they were pulling him out of necessity. And so, I mean, it definitely wasn't where he was working.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there is a legitimate reason as to why that is. It just bothered me for some reason, like
Because
it
there's no
looked-
dialogue to explain it.
It just looked it looked wrong.
Yeah, it looks more like a mistake.
And see, if that was in a cop show, you probably would have had the 20 seconds of, I don't have time to go get a shower, can I borrow your coat? And so he'd put on a blue coat. But I just don't think in the comic they showed that.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I do. I think the art was interesting, but I feel like it could have been stronger. And
I think the color. I
Really?
think I agree with you. The coloring
Yeah.
really does make a difference.
it could have been a lot, like, the mood could have been set a lot better. And it's something that I think that the colorist in Lock and Key is phenomenal. And so that book,
Yeah.
like, has a very polished look because of it. And feels spooky because of it, too.
It
Like,
really does.
I think the color goes such a long way.
We're definitely gonna have to talk about Lock and Key on an episode at some
Yeah,
point.
it's been recommended twice on the show. We'll definitely get to it. Anything else you guys
I think we're good.
wanted to add to this one?
Oh, I think that's it.
All right, let's jump ahead to recommendations. Joe, you want to go?
Yeah, I brought. I didn't physically bring it with me because I don't have it.
Oh,
I
then you
brought
can't
what I
recommend
have.
it.
Oh, I can recommend it. Mr. iPad.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have it on my. I have it on my.
Oh,
hard
hello.
drive.
Let me pull up these files. Enhance.
Enhance.
All right. Get your
I'm
book.
going to recommend the first trade of Warren Ellis's Run on the Authority, which is the Authority is pretty much what would happen if you took the JLA and got rid of that whole pesky.
Well, it's really a follow up to
Stormwatch.
Stormwatch.
It is Stormwatch.
I mean, Stormwatch was kind of Wildstorm's more realistic take on the JLA.
Well, Stormwatch was one of the original Image books that was started. I want to say that Stormwatch was Jim Lee's contribution to Image.
I thought Jim Lee was
No, it was
Wildcats.
Wildcats.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
Jim
you're
Lee.
right. You're right. Anyways, and it kind of
And Authority kind of spiraled out of Stormwatch.
Basically
basically them going like, "Fuck all the rules. It's our world
well,
now."
pretty much what happens is the head of Stormwatch goes insane and kills a bunch of people, and then
Oh,
the one-
spoilers.
well, no, this isn't Stormwatch. This isn't in the
Yeah, this
Authority.
is spoilers for a 20-year-old book
That's what I'm.
that
That's my
leads
joke.
into
All right,
the book
I
we're
got
actually
it.
going
We're
to
talking
read.
about.
I'm
But
joking,
if we
Joe.
go-
Just pitch your fucking
I'm
book.
pitching my book. God.
Shut your mouth. How about that?
So, anyways, basically, I know who I'm not voting for this week.
Wow.
God.
Wow.
It's the adventures of some really great characters, I think, and they don't fuck around. It's basically led by Jenny Sparks, who's the spirit of the 20th century. Jack Hawksmoor, who can talk to cities. Apollo and the Midnighter, who are this universe's Superman and Batman analog. But they're gay and they get married eventually.
Civil union.
Yeah, that's true. The Huntress, who's like kind of a hawk woman, hawk man analog, and the engineer who has 9 pints of nanotech instead of blood. And they kick a whole lot of ass, and they're unapologetic about it. And it's a lot of fun to read because, you know, I love Superman, love Batman, love the JLA. And when I say this, of course, I mean not the new
Pre-New
50s.
This
I mean
this was
pre-New
the
50s.
beginning of what was called at the time, I think, big screen comics or widescreen comics.
Yeah, and I mean it's very
And really heavily influenced what was going on in Marvel and DC in like the 2003 to 2008 kind of era.
According to Joe Quesada, it was actually the inspiration for the Ultimate Marvel Universe.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Which is not surprising at all.
I mean, this is like, you know, it's every once in a while, you know, you're reading these kind of more ideal comics where people are much more ideal. We don't kill because we're against that. Then we make us bad guys. And it's very nice to read the Authority after reading that because they're like, well, fuck that. Basically, you came here, you started killing us, so we're not going to kill you until you stop or you're all dead. And we can do it, too. Mm-hmm. And there's something refreshing about that. There's something incredibly fun about that.
And it's an important touchstone of modern comics.
It is. Yeah. It is. And it would eventually be written by, like, Mark Millar. I think Grant Morrison wrote some of it.
For a little bit.
But it's a lot. I mean, it's fun. It's fun in a very kind of psychopathic kind of way. But
it's one of Warren Ellis's better non-creator works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like Jack Hawksmoor is one of my favorite comic characters because it's just such an interesting idea.
Yeah, he's a weird kind of Spider-Man pastiche in a way, but he's got his own thing going on.
Yeah, and he can't and he's like, they call him the god of cities, but the further he gets from a city, he can't do it. You can't take him out into the boonies because he gets physically ill. And his body will start to shut down.
I think he's specifically characterized as a human who has been genetically altered specifically to live in cities.
By aliens specifically to live in cities. So, I mean, it's like the JLA pumped up to 11, and it's interesting to read, but it's also a lot of fun to read.
Joe, isn't that what the new 52 is? DC pumped up to 11?
So I'm going to throw you out of that window.
So, Joe, you actually did have it right the first time. Stormwatch was created by Jim Lee.
Wow.
Cool. With Brandon Choi, HK,
right,
Proger, I don't know, and Ron Mars.
Okay, all right.
See, why would you settle for throwing him out of the window when the sound is right there? Well, you could throw him into the sound.
Carry me all the way
to
the water.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry. I should have. The sound is.
Yeah.
Well, it's downhill.
Don't get lazy. Just
roll the
water.
Just
Just carry me to the
water.
water.
Like we're getting married or something.
And then throw me in. Yeah.
This is a punishment, not a treat.
Oh man. All right.
Eric, what did you bring?
I brought, since we're always hating on Frank Miller because he's gone insane, Daredevil Born Again. This is from 1986. Miller had done a seminal run similar to what Simonson did with Thor. Miller did with Daredevil. I think it was like 79 to 83-ish, somewhere in that.
About that, yeah.
Yeah, the late 70s and the early 80s, he took over originally as the penciler. And then took over writing chores on Daredevil and kind of darkened up the book. He created the character Elektra. A lot of the elements that I've bemoaned, and I know we all have in the past, he did so well that everyone after him did them to death. He was the originator, and at the time it was actually fresh and really well done. And this was pre-crazy Frank Miller, so he could actually write a really good story and draw it as well.
He had just come from his run as the artist on the book, where things were like much lighter. If you read the omnibus, the Frank Miller Daredevil omnibus, they include his issues with art first, and he's like fighting gorillas, and Daredevil's a much more lighthearted
They tried him out
character.
in Spectacular Spider-Man first, with Daredevil guest starring, and so those are in the book. And I can't remember who wrote it, but way more lighthearted in tone.
Much more Silver Age Marvel.
Definitely. And so that run was great, but this is his coming back to the book at least like 3 years later. And I know a handful of creators have gone back to books that they were heralded for doing, like Chris Claremont, who I've mentioned before, is one of my all-time favorites, and I love his initial 17-year gigantic run on Uncanny X-Men, but he came back to the X-Men several times over the years, and it was not good at all. And a lot of writers have done that with, like, oh, you were great on Wonder Woman, but then you came back, like, 10 years later, and it was like, ooh.
Jeff Loeb with Batman.
Yeah, there's certain people you can't go home, you know.
Peter David.
And it's important to note that Born Again is Miller working with Mazzucchelli
Batman.
before Batman Year One.
Correct.
And I actually think that Born Again is better than Year One.
I actually think it is too, and it's hard to admit because I love Batman Year One.
Disagree only in the art department because I think Mazzucchelli's art on Year One
grows, but
Mazzucchelli's art on Year One is immaculate.
Yeah.
But I
As
think
a
the two of them
complete
work
package,
together better on this, and I think they're both holding up their end of the log more.
I also think you'll find, if you listen to our past episodes, that I said that way before Toby ever did.
But basically, the whole point of this,
wow.
the whole point of this book is that Karen Page, the former girlfriend of Daredevil Matt Murdock, who again, all through the Silver Age was a big staple of the book. At this point, she is a junkie. She's a prostitute, basically, a porn star. She's fallen very far. Well, I know, and again,
Special.
Miller has done this since, and ripped him, like things like Sin City don't seem that fresh if you've read this, but this was, to my knowledge, the first time that he really got into that. And so during the things that I hate that Frank Miller does, he does them in here, but he does them very well. So like,
and he does them for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, Karen Page is like, the vehicle to make the hero look better. She's totally vilified, but and we can get into that if we choose to do this book. But basically, she knows who Daredevil is, so she sells him out to get a hit to this low-level street guy, and of course it gets up to the Kingpin, and the Kingpin, considers Daredevil to be like his number one nemesis. Instead of like just taking out Hit Squad and shooting the dude in the back of the head, he's like, no, fuck this, I'm going to torture this motherfucker. So basically, gets debarred, gets kicked out of his place. All of his personal relationships are destroyed. He's as a person, as a lawyer, completely discredited. A ton of stuff happens in this book. I don't want to get too into it.
Is this the book that came out? Like it took a long time between issues to come out, and they take place sort of in real time. Is this that Frank Miller Daredevil book?
This all came out in pretty quick succession. It's a pretty lengthy story.
Because I think there's a Daredevil that Frank Miller did, and you guys maybe can correct me, but there's like it came out many months apart each issue, but they came out the amount of time that had passed between the issues apart.
I think
I
Man Without
don't
Fear,
know
maybe?
about
I haven't read
that.
Man
Maybe.
Without
Okay.
Fear in a long time. But
No, Man Without Fear is just his origin.
yeah, but this
Okay, I don't know.
this is
I'll
just
look that up.
Matt Murdock broken down to his bare essence. Foggy doesn't trust him anymore. He gets disbarred. He's
He loses pretty much everything.
basically to the point where he's homeless. And that's where and after feeling sorry for himself for a while, he says, wait, fuck this, because one of the things I love about Daredevil that Miller really tied into is the whole Catholicism thing, really getting into the imagery. So it's why have you forsaken me? And then like, wait, fuck this, I'm going to be reborn, and so I'm going to pick myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm gonna be a lawyer again. I'm going to be a superhero again, and I'm going to take it to the Kingpin even, and I'm going to give it to him. And this is probably in the darker style, my favorite. Like the Mark Waid stuff is fucking amazing and fantastic, and probably the single best book that Marvel's doing right now. The Innocenti run, absolutely love. But as far as like the dark, gritty stuff, which again they did overdo, this is like the highlight of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is like the grittiest and most dark and depressing and dank that you can get, and still have it be actually really great and really moving.
Which to some of us is very hard to read.
But,
It is, but
that's
I mean, like when I read Brubaker's run and Bendis's run and stuff, you pick it up and you read it and you're like, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nobody will ever do it as well as Frank Miller did it. I mean, this is it. This is a great opportunity because Daredevil is busted down to his base components and then built back up. And it's really, when we talk about the moments as we do, when you are reading a book and you hit points where you are like hands in the air, you're like in a library filled with people and you're like, fuck yeah! And then you have to check yourself because there's just that much awesome going on.
I'll say the thing too.
It's the book that justifies Frank Miller's career.
No, it does. It does, and it makes me. That's what makes me so depressed about him currently and anything in the last 15 years is because I still own this book and I read this every 6-7 months just to remind myself that he used to actually be really good. And the weird thing too, even though this is a Daredevil book, I have to say this has one of my favorite page of a comic ever. I think it's just 4 panels, and it's actually the Avengers who show up. And in that one page with these 4 panels, it shows why Captain America of all people is just like the biggest pimp ever. And I'll leave it at that.
It's one of those panels you see posted around the internet a lot.
It's so moving, and to me, this is like why Miller is so great at his best. Is even though he didn't draw this, since he's an artist himself, I think he's really able to write this powerful imagery. This is the way that the panel movement happens. And Mazzucchelli being such a fantastic artist, to me they work. They're like chocolate and peanut butter. They go really well.
Absolutely. I love watching Frank Miller write for other artists. Like I think that it's really powerful, and I think that works really well.
It's when he's left on his own that he really goes to na-na land.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, he got the brain eater in a bad way.
Yeah, I mean, but,
And like you see the things that he does in this book, he does them over and over again, and every time that he does them, they get a little bit louder and a little bit crasser and a little bit less nuanced until eventually he's doing whatever Batman Holy Terror eventually became, where not Batman is fighting Al Qaeda
with not Catwoman.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And it's just absolutely around the fucking bend. And it was hard for me to read this the first time because I only read Born Again and his first run on Daredevil last year or earlier this year for the very first time. And I was having trouble with it reading it because I recognized all those elements that I'd seen in later Miller work. And I had to work to ignore the voice in my head going, that's fucked up. That's fucked up. And just go, this was the first time. You know, this hadn't been done before. And let it be what it was.
In that era too, it was like a lot different because of what had come before and what was going on in other books at the time was so much of a different tone. That this isn't like the New 52 where everything is like grittier, darker, and we're assholes.
This is the same year that Watchmen came out, and the same year that Dark Knight Returns came out. All three in 1986. So that was like,
which is right after go read Crisis on Infinite Earths and then read this and go, oh, okay, I understand why this blew people's minds.
Yeah, well, that's why people consider about 86 or so to be the modern era of comics. And this is where comics, quote unquote, grow up is in books like this and Watchmen.
And other superhero books.
Important touchstone of the 80s.
Yeah. Super different.
Just as the Authority is for the 90s.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just like the way we use the word touchstone.
I know. It's cool. It's a good word. Good word.
So I've previously pitched Phonogram by Jamie McKelvey and Kieran Gillen.
Yep.
After they did that, Jamie McKelvey did a 4-issue solo work with Image, which is my pitch for this week, Suburban Glamour. And it's about this teenage girl and a couple of her friends, and they live in this small town in England. And then fairies and monsters and shit start showing up, and the girl is tied to them in a way that I won't reveal yet. And they have this little adventure. And it's just kind of fun and cool, and I love Jamie McKelvey's art. And the line work in this is incredible, and the colors are fucking ridiculous. I love them so much. It's just a beautiful comic to look at. Like, it makes me happy to read this comic.
Nice.
The story isn't the best thing ever because McKelvey is primarily an artist. So it's not bad. It's just kind of simple and short, but it's a good comic that I just like to read every so often just for funsies.
Nice.
Yeah. Not super deep, not the best thing that I've ever read in my life, but it's fun.
Didn't you lend that to Audrey?
I think I did. And I think she liked it a lot.
Yeah, I seem to remember her liking it.
Cade, what did you bring?
Cade.
Sorry, I just got to say, though, that guy on that page you're holding up, he looks like a douche.
Which page
I can
was that?
smell the Axe body spray. I can smell it.
Smell it from here.
He is actually one of the less douchey characters in this series, if I recall.
I'm so sorry. I just
Yeah, maybe I should show some of the other pages too.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about characters speaking to you and the emotional and
All right,
Okay.
Kate, what'd you bring?
So Halloween is coming up. I'm not sure when exactly this.
Sorry, I'm just holding up the page where the douchey
There's
guy
more douchey
punches out the guy who tries to slip roofies into the girl's drink.
Oh,
Because
Okay.
he's a stand-up dude.
douche versus douche.
Yeah.
No, he's actually a good guy.
All right.
Okay, yeah, less douchey. Okay.
Ultra mega douche.
That's how you make a guy less douchey is you have him fight a bigger douche.
Exactly.
All right,
Works for me.
Cade, what do you got?
Okay, so with Halloween coming up, I haven't done the math, so I'm not really sure when this episode drops and when next week's episode is going
It'll
to
probably
drop.
be right around Halloween.
Pretty close to Halloween,
But-
so I think you timed it well.
So, I brought Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's Batman: The Long Halloween, which
My favorite comic of all time. So
it's an awesome Batman book. It really goes back to his roots as a detective. It's a good detective story. And I mean, I don't really know what to say about it.
Well, I only read it once a while ago, so can you give me the quick elevator pitch on what it's about?
it's
Because I know that there's
It's
like
about these-
crimes going on over the
there's-
course of a year.
murders.
Holiday-related murders.
Murders are happening on every holiday, and Batman's trying to find out who it is and
It's
what's
Calendar
going on.
Man.
well that he actually goes right to Calendar Man first, obviously. 'Cause
Yeah, I
it's like,
vaguely remember that.
Calendar
It's like
Man's
Yeah,
in Arkham, and
this
he's
is
after
kind
like,
of
the
your thing,
second
so-
one happens, he's like, obviously this is Calendar Man.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
gotta
you're
be
like,
Why is
Calendar
Calendar
Man.
Man fat in Arkham City? I don't get what? And then you're falling down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden, New 52. That's his.
well,
But
the thing
there's-
that was cool about this too was it came out on the holiday or close to the holidays that those murders took place
Yeah.
on. So it'd be like the first murder would be Halloween. That's that week the issue came out was the week of Halloween. Next one's Christmas. You had to wait until near Christmas.
No, Thanksgiving.
Or Thanksgiving, yeah, sorry. Thanksgiving was next and then Christmas. And so they were coming out like around those holidays, which is kind of novel, but something you don't experience by reading it in the trade. But cool
Very
thing to know.
true.
But yeah, it's 13 issues. Each one is set near a holiday, and a murder takes place. And it's Batman basically running through his rogues gallery and the mob, because this is pretty early in Batman's career.
Yeah, this is
They
like
say
year one, or it's year one because it's pre-Robin, because Dark Victory, the sequel, was
Right.
year 3. That is Dick. I almost said Tim. That's Dick Grayson coming
Yeah,
in.
people
brand
say
new at that
somewhere
point.
between year 1 and year 2, because
Yeah.
the Joker and a
definitely
few super
pre-Robin.
villains are there. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it has Harvey Dent's or Two Face's origin.
yeah,
Yeah, a lot of the stuff about the gangsters.
yeah, it's very
They're-
mob
The
related.
Falcones and all that
Yeah.
fun stuff.
all right.
And it's it very heavily influenced Chris Nolan for his Batman
Batman,
trilogy.
yeah.
Oh, for sure.
In not in so much the story for his trilogy, because none of them really play into that, but in like the representation of the mob family, Bruce's relation to the mob family, how Selena Kyle kind of ties into that, and there are some shot-for-shot panels from this book and Dark Victory that end up in the Batman Begins trilogy. So it's definitely an influential Batman book. I say that it's my favorite comic of all time, not because I think it's the best comic of all time, but this is the book that saved comics for me. I had quit, and then I read this, and I was like, all right, I'll come back. So for me, it'll always have like a huge place in my heart, and I do love Batman. And Tim Sale's art it's very polarizing. Like, some people hate it and some people love it, but for me, I absolutely love it. I think it's very iconic Batman art for me. So
It's one of the biggest sellers in the shop too, if that's a selling point at all.
Yeah, it's got staying power.
it's still relevant too, I think.
Well, it's one of the classic Batman stories
Yeah.
that everybody talks about.
And
it's a good starting point.
well,
I think.
we talk about, it's cool to see the things that we talk about that we love about Batman. Go back and listen to the Batman Venom episode.
Yeah.
But something that we talked about is it's cool to see Batman be a detective again.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see Batman fail.
Yeah.
Because what we are used to now is the super god, Super Bat, where he is 42 steps ahead of you, and so you can never commit a crime.
Yeah.
And what's cool about this book is he's trying to solve a crime. He's 10 steps behind the criminal.
Yeah.
He's constantly trying to catch up. He's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on. Let me get to where I can solve this crime. And it's cool to see Batman be a detective
Stumble,
again.
yeah.
Be infallible. He is a man, and
I mean,
that's
be
what,
fallible.
Be fallible. Sorry, and he is a man, and that's what makes him interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
And so this to me is right up there with Venom as a great sort of failure, but also awesome story in Batman's detective career. So that's that's what I like about this as a Batman story.
It's one of my favorites. As Toby will attest, I have far more Batman trades than I have anything else in my collection, and if somebody came up to me and said, "What Batman story should I read?" That's probably the first thing I would say is read Long Halloween, because it puts you right in the beginning, and I think it sets up Batman really nicely in a way that you might not like. If you read Year One right away, you're not really going to have the connection to Batman to make that an important story. But other things like Bruce Wayne Murderer, Bruce Wayne Fugitive might have a little bit too much of the Batman mythos in it, so you might not be able to, it's too much to kind of, I think Long Halloween is at this great point where you get to see all the major characters. There's not too much that's gone on, so that you don't really have to kind of, it's not referring to things that have happened like Cataclysm or No Man's Land, where you'd have to be like, well, what the fuck is that?
Right. It's early in the continuity. I feel like it totally stands alone. Like,
absolutely. So
I mean, I own 3 copies of this book. I owned 4, and the cover of one fell off, which made me need to buy a new one.
Yeah, you own the Absolute.
I own the Absolute. I own the first edition hardcover. I own the trade paperback. I had 2 copies of the trade paperback because one was starting to fall apart. And when I was in Japan, I saw this in Japanese and bought it. And I was like, I don't need 5 copies of this book. So I gave it to my friend in Japan who loves Batman. He was like, I love Batman and DC superheroes. So I was like, oh, read this Batman story. Have you read it? And he was like, no. And so I gave it to him to read it in Japanese. So
good deal.
I own this story too many times.
Yeah.
Really, to be honest. But that's how much I love it. I think it's great.
It's a solid one.
All right, so my pitch this week is a book that I found out about yesterday and read immediately after I found out about it, because I was like, why the fuck didn't anybody tell me about this book? Like, I was actually upset because it's 2 of my favorite things.
In my defense, I figured that you had to already know about it.
As did everyone else in the entire world, because it's like, hey, those things you talk about all the time, well, there's 2 of them together in a book. Obviously, you've read that. And it's Godzilla, the Half-Century War, written and drawn by James Stoke, who I've recommended 4, probably just 3
at least
games.
Twice. I mean, Orkstein was the first episode,
and then I've recommended
and then
Sullivan Sluggers, and I think did I recommend Wonton Soup, or did I just?
I don't think so.
Okay,
no, you.
I've definitely talked about it.
I'm almost positive you have, because I think I read it.
Well, I've definitely talked about it. Wonton Soup was kind of his first foray, where chefs are trained.
You definitely talked about
style.
it. I don't think you've recommended it, because I don't think it's on the reading list.
Okay.
Maybe it's...
but it's James Stoke, whose art I love. I think he's really interesting and inventive, and he creates some of the craziest, wackiest worlds you can imagine. Go read Wonton Soup and Orkstein if you want to know what I'm talking about. The worlds are just insane. It was very similar to Brandon Graham's King City, where the world is very original and wacky, but James Stoke kind of turns it to 11 on the squidgy factor, where there's penises and weird
everything's
everything's really
and
gross looking.
You haven't heard our podcast, which I wasn't on. So,
Orkstein, no, you weren't.
But the Orkstein podcast, the main unit of currency in the Orkstein universe is troll penis.
Well, it's
that
money
that
they make out
and
of
dried
penises.
into coins.
They're orc penises.
Yeah, they're orc penises.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not troll penises.
Yeah, because they're all orcs, and they they cut them up into coin shapes and dry them. And in the back of that book, there's a little how to make an orc penis into money section, and that threw a lot of people. But that's the wacky world that James Stoke works with. Is everything's really gross and drippy, and that's why I bought Sullivan Sluggers and read it, is because it's a horror book about weird, crazy monsters.
Right.
I was like, James Stoke will kill this. It will be so good. But what's interesting about this story, Godzilla Half-Century War, is he's not creating anything for this book. He's drawing the characters from Toho Studios, Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, Gigan, King Ghidorah, they're all in here, and he draws them, and they look great. They look just like movie versions of themselves. It's set in our world, so all the tanks, they look a little bit like Metal Slug tanks, but they're still tanks, they don't have 800 arms on them or anything. And it's interesting to see him draw a very real, quote unquote, real world story. It is still Godzilla, so there are still monsters, but it's the action scenes that really get to me in this book. The way that he can convey how Godzilla is blowing up entire buildings, like the way he draws action is really interesting. And something I love about this book, as well as other James Stoke books, is he characterizes his characters really well. So this story it starts in Japan in 1954, and it follows these two guys that survived. They're 20 years old, they're really young, and they are in a tank unit that gets completely wiped out by Godzilla on his first attack in Tokyo. But they survive, and they actually help lead Godzilla away from some important buildings and stuff. So they did good work, and they are recognized by these military guys to be, survivors, and they're kind of the only ones that have fought Godzilla and survived. So they get to join a special unit called the AMF, which is the Anti-Megalodon, whatever, Federate something. I don't know. I don't remember what it stands for. But they basically now, for the next 50 years, follow, which is Godzilla's career, as the last Godzilla movie was made in 2004. And the next one comes out next year in 2014. But they had said they were not going to make a Godzilla movie for 10 years, and they stuck to it. So the last Toho Godzilla movie was 2004, and this follows that entire... It doesn't follow the movies, but it follows that 50 years of them following Godzilla around the world as he fights other monsters. And there's a real human element because there are humans that are trying to use these monsters for, evil by luring them special places. So it's great. It's just monsters, and Mechagodzilla's in it, and they drive him and fight against and alongside Godzilla at points. And it's got a great ending. It's just 5 issues, real fun story. If you love Godzilla, you will love this story. If you like James Stoke, I definitely recommend it. And if you liked Pacific Rim and you like kaijus and you want some kaiju fun, this is another great story about giant monsters punching each other in the face. And that's everything I love about comic books. This shit's awesome, and the art's great, and the splash pages in this are super cool. If you're a Godzilla fan, you'll be picking out all of your favorite kaijus. So
Awesome.
and they're pretty much, they're not all in there, but a lot of them.
Most of them.
And some that I'm like, really, that one? Okay. But yeah, all the big ones are in there, so definitely read it. All right.
I want to vote last.
Yeah,
Or-
Toby, what do you want to read?
Oh, geez. Why do you have to ask me first?
I don't know. I was just kind of go around and pick a random person.
Maddox, what do you want to read?
No, Toby.
No, don't go to me first. I can't do it. It's too much pressure.
Okay, well, count to 3 and everybody... No.
Everyone yelling into the mic. That won't ruin it.
I can go first over the mic.
All right.
I'm going to
What
go
do you
Long
want?
Halloween.
Cool.
Partly because of the timing, because I think it'd be kind of cool, and I'm nerdy like that. Also, it is one of my favorite Batman stories. It is really great, and I haven't read it in probably 8 years or something. So I'm long overdue for it. I know.
You don't read it every 2 weeks like I do?
I do.
Yes,
I think I've only
Actually,
actually read it once.
I haven't
honestly,
read it
so.
in a while, which is kind of surprising. But
Oh,
I
it's
usually
amazing,
read it.
because usually
pretty
I'm like,
often.
hey, Chard, want to hang out? And he's like, no, must read The Long Halloween tonight, yes.
Neither of those things have ever happened.
Yeah, totally invited you to come
Okay,
hang out.
sure.
Anyways.
I guess I'm going to vote for The Authority. That's very hard for me to say.
Yeah, there's a
not
lot of-
because not because of The Authority, because there's so many good books
There's a
this
lot
week.
of good books this week.
Like I want to
What do you
read
wanna
all
read?
of these things.
What do I want? I have to break the tie. I go
No.
last.
No,
Maybe somebody else should break the tie.
Joe can break the tie. Cade, what are you voting for?
I want to know what Chart is going to vote for.
Oh my god.
All right. I actually am gonna vote for Daredevil. Was it Reborn?
Born Again.
Born Again.
Born
Born
Again.
Again.
Because I've never read this Daredevil story.
So
I'm actually
good.
not a huge Daredevil fan, but Mark Waid has totally whetted my appetite for more Daredevil. I read the Kevin Smith Daredevil, and I started reading the Bendis stuff, and I just never really got into the character. It wasn't until Mark Waid totally sold me on it, and I'm behind on that series.
I was in the
but-
exact same place. Like I'd
Yeah.
never read Daredevil. I read the Mark Waid stuff, and I was talking to my boss, and I was like, I really like this Mark Waid stuff, and he's like, I have all the the Frank Miller stuff. Like, do you want to read it? And I was like, yes, please.
Yeah.
I
Which
I
is-
want to get a grounding in where the character came from.
And Joe's tried to get me to read it a couple times.
I've tried to get both of you to read it.
You motherfucker.
I still prefer the Mark Waid stuff because it's more my speed, but reading the Frank Miller stuff was really important.
I think it'll make you appreciate the Mark.
I
Waid
love
stuff
old
more,
comics, so this is not a stretch for me.
And
It's
honestly, like
read.
between his original run and Born Again, which is like kind of a standalone thing, I think Born Again is the better thing to read.
Cool. So I want to read Board Again. So that's
Okay.
my vote.
So,
Joe,
Cade.
what do you got?
I want to
Cade?
know.
Oh,
I want to
Cade.
know what Cade's going to do. Because I have a plan in place.
God.
And I have a plan too, because like I want to vote for the Authority, but then you can't vote for Long Halloween, or it would be a tie.
But we can, I mean, you can bring things, just vote for the Authority.
Just do it.
Okay, the Authority.
Well, you
right.
could have voted for Godzilla, and then Joe. would
Well,
have
I'm going to vote because I decided that if Cade voted for the Authority, I would vote for Godzilla.
Oh, okay.
But as normally, you should read all of these things.
there's a lot of
and
good stuff.
I'm going to tell you right now that it doesn't matter if you guys bring these books again. I will bring them because they are two of my favorites, which is why I could not choose between them. Because
Well, maybe next Halloween we'll do Long Halloween.
I want to talk.
I think we should talk about the Long Halloween for Christmas because there's no Batman the Long Christmas comic.
Well, and it does take place.
There should be.
It's called the Long Halloween because it starts on a Halloween and it ends on a Halloween.
So
But there is
got-
every
it's
single
Christmas
holiday. It's
in it,
a
yeah.
Valentine's
Yeah.
Day's in there,
Yeah,
and
totally,
St. Patrick's
totally.
Day.
Yeah, and just these are two of my very favorite things to read, and they're both books that I feel exemplify the characters they're about in very profound ways, and so there's just no way that I did not want to have to choose between them. So no, I don't have to.
All right.
I don't
Yeah,
have to-
choosing between Godzilla, Born Again, and the Authority is incredibly
Daredevil
difficult
Born
for me.
Again, not Godzilla Born Again.
No,
Oh
yeah,
Oh,
Godzilla,
Godzilla, comma Born Again,
and comma the Authority. No
Godzilla
offense to
Born
Cade,
Again.
I'm just not
You've
a huge
already
Batman
you
guy,
already read the Long Halloween,
and I have read the
series.
Long Halloween.
And I do think that the cool thing about the Godzilla book, not to go back to it, but is it ends in the 2000s, but it has like a really great. It concludes in a really good way. So if you like Godzilla and you've never read any of the Godzilla comics, and you just kind of want something to read one off, like this is perfect.
Right.
Which is why I totally recommend this over other Godzilla comics. Is it like it has a beginning and an end, and the end is very satisfying.
All right.
But all right, next week we'll read all the books as usual,
Yep.
and next week we'll see you for the Authority.
The Authority,
Yeah,
which is,
and,
I'm pretty sure is Volume 1 of The Authority, Volume 1.
Okay,
Not Volume 2.
Volume
and if you-
1 of Volume 2.
No, we don't want Volume 1 of Volume 2.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We don't want Volume 1 of Volume 2. We want Volume 1 of Volume 1. Warren Ellis.
Right.
Look for Warren
So
Ellis.
if you're reading it and Jenny Sparks isn't in there, then you've probably got the wrong thing.
Okay.
And as usual, like us on Facebook, rate us on iTunes,
Yeah, leave us a
and we've
review.
got a YouTube channel now.
Yeah.
So there should be a link for that on the website going up. If you want to listen to us on YouTube, we've gotten a bunch of requests.
Yeah.
So
It's-
that's a thing that exists now.
Right now, it's just the audio episodes that you've already heard, but we do have some plans to maybe do some video content in the
Yeah,
future. So
yeah, absolutely.
keep an eye on that and just
Like us,
sub
subscribe
it
to
there
us, comment on us, tell us
Twitter-
what we're doing wrong,
Twitter at
email
us.
tweet at us, Facebook at us, tell us you hate us, you love us. You know, come on.
listen. All right.
Come on.
We'll see you next week, guys. Thanks for
And yeah.
listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.